The start of the 2025 NFL Draft is just around 3 weeks away, so in today's video, I want to go over everything that you should know before the draft begins. Now, the first thing we should go over is the programming for the draft. It is going to be in Green Bay, Wisconsin for the first time in NFL history. The first round is on Thursday, April 24th, starting at 8 p.m. You can find the second and third round on Friday the 25th, starting at 7, and round 4 through 7, which is known as day 3 of the draft, is Saturday, April 26th, starting at 12 p.m. You can find it on ESPN, ABC, and the NFL Network. It will also be streamed on Fubo and CBS. Another important thing to know is the teams that will be controlling the early selections in the draft and kind of just determine the larger outcome of what happens, especially in the first round. Teams like the Titans, Browns, and Giants, where those teams go, top of the draft, whether the Browns take a quarterback, maybe the Giants take a quarterback, that is going to have a lot of ramifications for the rest of these teams inside the top 10, and even later as we get into like the middle of the first round. Now, the first position group that we really need to dive into is the quarterback position, which is known as maybe the most important position in all of sports. So I think there's likely going to be 3 quarterbacks that are taken in the first round. If you go on any betting site, whether that's DraftKings, FanDuel, it's usually minus 300 across all those sites that 3 quarterbacks will be picked in the first round. So there are 2 obvious ones. We have Cam Ward. He will be the first overall pick to the Titans. That's pretty much set in stone at this point. And then Shedeur Sanders. He's got a little bit more variance on where he will be picked. Is that going to be in the top 3, top 5, top 10? Will he fall even to maybe the end of the first round? That is up in the air, but I do feel really confident in saying Shedeur Sanders will be drafted in the first round. But then after those 2 guys, there's a kind of big drop off, I guess, in terms of, I would say, how those prospects are viewed. And the next 2 up are Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe. Those are the consensus 3rd and 4th quarterbacks in this draft. And I think those quarterbacks do have a chance, both of them, to maybe slip into the end of the first round. There has been a lot of talk recently about maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers being really interested in Jalen Milroe and his talent. But overall, this quarterback class is seen as fairly weak and one of the weaker quarterback drafts we've seen in recent memory. And the reason for that is the actual number of first round talents. I mentioned Cam Ward, and he probably would have been maybe the 4th or 5th quarterback off of the board in last year's NFL draft when you had Caleb Williams, you had Drake May, you had Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix even. I mean, you had a lot of really nice players in last year's draft. I think Cam Ward would have been fighting to maybe go in that 4th to 5th range. So that does tell you a little bit about this year's class. But Ward, he is seen as the quarterback that has the highest upside in this draft. He's got a very good arm. He can play off script. And that is something that we've been seeing in recent memory in the NFL, is what separates good quarterbacks from being elite. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. What do they add to their games that some other quarterbacks that are really stuck into the confines of the offense, they are able to make things happen when the play breaks down. And that's what Cam Ward is really, really good at doing, and why he's seen as the top quarterback in this draft. Now, Shedeur Sanders, he's probably the most polarizing player in the entire NFL draft, regardless of position, player, school, anything. He's probably the most polarizing player. Some people think he's a talented quarterback. He should go in the first round, probably the top 10. And then you have a whole other group of people that don't even think he's like a 2nd round talent. He's going to be a massive bust. He should not be drafted in the first maybe 50 picks of the draft. And I think the truth of that lies somewhere in the middle. I'm higher, I would say, on Sanders than most people. I think he did show a lot at Colorado the past couple of years. He did set the completion percentage record for a single season in college football this past season. And I do think he's more talented than some of the other quarterbacks that have come out in recent memory, like Kenny Pickett and Mac Jones. And those guys were first-round picks. But I do think having questions about his ceiling, like if he can be a top 5 quarterback in the league, if he can be a top 10 quarterback in the league, those are fair questions to ask, because he doesn't have some of the physical talent of the guys we see in the NFL now. Like I've already mentioned them, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar Jackson, even Cam Ward. All those guys do have more physical talent than Shedeur, but I do think he deserves to be known as a first-round talent, and I do think he will be picked in the first round. It's just unknown currently if that is going to be in the top 10, top 5, or wherever else. Now, to Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe, they're very interesting prospects because they do have more physical talent than Shedeur Sanders, for example. But their college production and film, it's just not close to what Shedeur put on tape for multiple seasons in college football. I would say with Dart, the biggest thing with him is he did run a very RPO-centric offense. The Lane Kiffin offense is really known as a very simplistic one, and one that really does maximize what quarterbacks can do, because it's a lot of like, they hike, find your first read, get the receiver the ball, and that's kind of all you got to do. But when Dart had to process things, move off of his first read, go to 2nd and 3, that's where he struggled. He would hold on to the ball a little bit too much. He would make some bad mistakes. And that's what he has to really shore up in the NFL if he is going to become a good NFL quarterback. But I think if you went to a situation like maybe Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams in the bottom half of the first round, that could be a good spot for him to develop, learn how to play NFL quarterback, learn how to process the game, because he does have good physical talent. He's got a very good arm. He can move and play off script. And so I think that he does have the edge in terms of talent to Shedeur Sanders, but he's got to learn how to actually play the quarterback position better. And I think the exact same thing that I just said, it could basically be said even more for Jalen Milroe. Talk about one of the fastest quarterbacks we've ever seen. He ran a 4.37 at his pro day. He has an absolute rocket for an arm. His issue, again, is playing the quarterback position. He's not very accurate. He can't see the field very well. He doesn't really know how to process things well. But again, we've seen some other quarterbacks get drafted very high with some of the same physical talent as him. For example, Anthony Richardson, inside the top 5 just a couple of years ago with the Colts. I think Jalen Milroe has around the same level of talent as AR. He's not as big as Richardson. I think he's around like 6'2". But in terms of his arm strength and his ability to run, Jalen Milroe is pretty similar to what Anthony Richardson was when he came out of Florida. So I do think with so many quarterback-needy teams that Dart and Milroe will likely go in the first 2 rounds. I think one of them will sneak in to the bottom half of the first round. It kind of just depends on which team likes one of these guys more than the other. Now, to put a bow on this quarterback class, it doesn't have as many top guys as you would want in a quarterback draft, but it does have a lot of really good depth and players that could be potential long-time backups in the NFL. And that is something that is fairly rare. I mean, there's like 4 to 5 guys where you can take them in day 3, maybe even day 2, and you can feel comfortable like, okay, this guy could be a part of our team and system for 5+ years, be a cheap backup option for us, and maybe we can even develop him into maybe being a starter or a bridge starter in the NFL. And some of those guys, Cal McCord out of Syracuse, I think he is somebody that probably leads that clubhouse as maybe like the tier leader in 3. So if we do like Cam Ward and Shedeur as guaranteed first-round picks in our tier 1, we've got Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart as kind of our tier 2 guys. I think McCord leads that tier 3. He'll probably go, I think, in the 3rd round. And then you got other quarterbacks like Will Howard and Riley Leonard, the 2 quarterbacks that just played in the College National Championship. I think those are intriguing options in day 3. You got Oregon's Dylan Gabriel and 25-year-old Tyler Shuck. He's gotten a ton of hype, I would say, on draft Twitter. And if you just go on social media, a lot of people say like, man, is this guy maybe the 2nd best quarterback in this draft? He's a guy that's dealt with a ton of injuries in college. Like I said, he's 25 years old. But he put on really good tape last year for Louisville. I personally don't think he's going to go in day 1 or 2 due to those injury concerns, due to his age. But he could be like a hidden gem in day 3 where maybe a quarterback-needy team just takes a swing on him in round 5, 6, or 7, and maybe he emerges as their starter down the line after a couple of years. Who knows? But I do think while this draft doesn't have a ton of elite prospects, it does have a lot of depth and players that I do think could be long-time backups in the NFL. So look for a lot of NFL teams to maybe take some flyers in day 3 on some of the guys I just named. Now, this running back class is seen as one of the best classes we've had in several years. It's very deep, so many players that can be drafted in day 2 and day 3 that could be day 1 NFL starters, but then we also have at the top a couple of elite running back prospects as well in Ashton Jeanty and Amarian Hampton. Starting off with Jeanty, he's an interesting prospect because he is on the smaller size. He's 5'8". He did play at a Mountain West school, so a smaller program as well in Boise State. But he just had a historic season, number 2 in the Heisman Trophy, almost broke Barry Sanders' single-season rushing yards record. But I don't think he's some flawless prospect where he's a guaranteed top 5, top 10 pick. And that's kind of what I've been preaching across this channel and other social media channels is I think Jeanty's a really good player, but with how deep this running back class is, does it make a ton of sense to take him top 10 in the NFL draft? I personally, if I was building a team, would not do that. But I do think it's worth mentioning that a lot of people do view him as the best running back prospect since maybe even Saquon Barkley or Bijan Robinson. He's got great contact balance. He does have the ability to break arm tackles. I wouldn't say he has home run hitting speed, but in terms of 40, 50-yard runs, he is going to be able to have those in the NFL. As a sophomore, he also led the country in receiving yards for a running back, so we know that he can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. So all around as a running back prospect, if you take away kind of his size, which is smaller, as I mentioned, and playing for a smaller school in Boise State, he does kind of have everything that you would want in a running back prospect. But one of my favorite players personally in this draft is Amarian Hampton out of North Carolina. He's bigger than Genty. He's over 6 feet tall. He's over 220 pounds, and he ran a 4.46 at the 40-yard dash. He's an absolute freak, and if you get in his way, he's going to run through you. He's a very physical runner. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. I think Hampton is a really, really good prospect, and he's probably going to go, I would say middle first is his ceiling, but towards the end of the first round, maybe very early in day 2, you can expect Hampton off the board. I think he's going to be a really good player from day 1 in the NFL. But even outside of those top 2 guys, it goes like 5, 6 deep of just really amazing prospects, starting off with 2 Ohio State Buckeyes and Travion Henderson and Quinshad Judkins. They were a fantastic duo at Ohio State this past year. I think both of those guys will likely go on day 2, whether that's round 2 or 3. But I think both of those guys do have the chance to be an impact starter from day 1. You've got Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, another very big back. I think he's over 6'1", but he has some good speed to his game as well. And then somebody like Cam Skattebo. He plays the game the right way. He's got all the fundamentals. I love myself some Cam Skattebo, just a very gritty and tough physical player. I think he's another guy that could probably go like in the 4th round, a really good value pick there. Dylan Sampson, Devin Neal. I mean, it just goes on and on with how many good running back prospects you can get in day 2 and 3 of this draft. So it's a very deep class. You got a couple elite prospects top of the board as well. But I think one of the bigger things to note regarding this running back class in this draft is how teams kind of value the position, and if they would rather take one inside the top 10, like a Genty or Hampton very early in the first round, or maybe go on the offensive line or defensive line in the first round, and then take one of these other running backs that I mentioned in day 2 or 3. It's going to be a very interesting approach on what each NFL team decides to do in terms of positional value. But I do think Genty and Hampton are first round talents. We will see them go in the first round of the draft. I think it's just a matter of how soon that will be. Will it be the Raiders? Will it be the Bears inside the top 10? Or will they fall to like the middle to late first? That's going to be very interesting to watch. But a great running back class, one of the best we've seen in recent years. Now, the wide receiver class is similar to the quarterback and running back class in terms that it has a lot of really nice depth players that you can find in day 2 and 3, but kind of similar to the quarterback class, it doesn't have a lot of elite prospects that we've seen in recent years. I mean, we've seen some really great receiver talent come out in the last several drafts. I mean, you go to Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. Some of those players, I don't think we're going to see that many emerge from this draft, but I think we could see a lot of like wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s, found in day 2 and day 3. And some of those guys could be like Trey Harris, Savion Williams, Alec Umanor, Jalen Royals. You can get most of these guys in day 2 and feel pretty good about them stepping in right away and being able to contribute to your offense. But I don't know how many true difference makers and like elite receivers are going to come from this draft. I would say the consensus #1 receiver is Tetairoa McMillan, and he's become a pretty polarizing player in this draft process. You see a lot of people say he's like the next Mike Evans or maybe Drake London. And then you got other people who are like, yeah, I don't really see it with him. He's got good speed, but not great speed. His athleticism is there, but is it quite kind of the top level like what a Mike Evans shows? His route running is still fairly raw. How is he going to develop at the next level? So there are some questions with his game. I'm pretty high on McMillan. I do think he will be an X receiver at the next level and be an impact starter. So I would have no problem taking him top 10 in the NFL draft. I think with his size and his speed, I mean, he's over 6'4", he's over 220 pounds. He's obviously not going to have the greatest short-term burst and acceleration at that size, but he's a long strider. If you get the ball to him in space, if you throw a 50-yard bomb to him, he's going to be able to outrun defenses to the end zone. I do think he has that capability. So I think McMillan will be the best receiver from this draft, and I'm really interested to see how early he does go, because early in this process, he was seen as a guaranteed top 10 pick. Now there's some talk about him maybe falling to the middle first round, maybe somebody like Matthew Golden out of Texas, kind of a late riser in this process, overtakes him. And Golden's a little bit smaller. He's under 6 feet tall. He's around that 190-pound range, but he ran a blazing fast 40-yard dash. He's got fantastic long speed, and he actually is a little bit more polished as a route runner as well compared to McMillan. And he was the go-to man for Texas and the college football playoffs with Quinn Ewers throwing him the football. So I think Golden is a guy that could surprise people with how early he goes. I do think the Cowboys at pick number 12 is maybe the range that he could go because they need another receiver. I think Golden's a good fit there next to CeeDee Lamb. But then a couple of other potential first-round picks is like Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. a guy that's kind of similar to Jackson Smith and Jigba when he came out of Ohio State, maybe better suited to be a primary slot guy. In the NFL, doesn't have great athleticism or speed, but he's just very sure-handed. He knows where to sit in zones, pick up first downs, be a chain mover. That's what he's going to provide to your offense. I think Ibuka could be a bottom half of the first round guy. And then Luther Burden III out of Missouri, another really interesting player because he's a little bit more of a finesse player. He's around 6 feet, 200 pounds, but when he had to face off against press and more physical cornerbacks and defenses, he did struggle to consistently beat that and find himself open. But if you get the ball in his hands, he's going to make a lot of defenders miss. He does have really good agility and acceleration and elusiveness. I don't think he has great home run hitting speed, but probably around the 4.4, 4.5 range. I think that's more than good enough. So I don't think Burden projects to be an X receiver in the NFL, but somebody that can be your wide receiver too, or maybe even your slot receiver at the next level. I think a team like the Broncos towards the latter half of the first round would be a really good fit for him because Sean Payton can scheme him up, get him free releases and some just nice touches in space. So I would say those are the 4 receivers I would really look for to be first round picks. You got McMillan, Golden, Ibuka, and Luther Burden. If I had to guess, I would say probably 3 of them go in the first round. I think maybe Ibuka could be an early day 2 pick. So this receiver class, there is some decent talent atop the board, but I do think each one of these guys do have some questions about their games. But not like certified elite prospects that we've seen come out in recent years. But I think the overall depth of this class and just how many names we can get in day 2 and day 3 is just good NFL starters is what makes this receiver class pretty good overall. And I think a lot of teams will get some good starters out of this class. Now, another really fun class is the tight end position with Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland leading off this group. Probably 2 first-round picks there. And this has been a pretty big draft debate, I would say, if you go on Twitter and just see what people are arguing about, is who was tight end 1? Is it Tyler Warren? Is it Colston Loveland? I would personally still give the edge to Tyler Warren, over 6'6", 250 pounds, and had a fantastic season for Penn State this past year. Really was their entire offense. I mean, he threw passes for them. He ran the football, whether that was tush pushes or just design quarterback runs. And he was also their leading receiver. So he did a ton for their offense last year. And one thing that I do think is fair to question with Tyler Warren is his blocking ability. That was why originally a lot of people had him over Loveland because they were like, man, Tyler Warren is a complete tight end. He's a fantastic blocker. I don't think that's necessarily true. Tyler Warren was really used in a unique way for Penn State in terms of blocking. They kind of used him as like a fullback to give him like a running start to go and hit linebackers. But anytime he was actually in line, kind of had the task of blocking an edge rusher or a defensive lineman, he struggled at times to kind of hold his own. And I think that has to do with his arm length. He does have smaller arms when it comes to the tight end position. So that did make him struggle a bit sometimes against defensive linemen, which is something to watch in the NFL. I do think, of course, he does have the size, the frame, maybe get better in that area. I mean, he's not a bad blocker, but I do think it's a slightly overrated part of his game. But I think with his ability after the catch to break tackles and just be a physical force, that is going to be something really fun to watch for NFL teams. I think his catch radius, ability to moss defenders, another huge plus for his game. So I think right away, Warren is going to be an impact starter for an offense. You can build, I believe, an offense around him. He does need to work on his blocking if he ever is going to emerge as like a top 5 tight end in the league. But I would still have him as tight end 1 and then Colston Loveland as tight end 2 out of Michigan. Now, Loveland is 6'6", the same size as Warren, but he hasn't really filled up his frame as well as Warren has. I think that does have to do with his age. He is one of the youngest players in this NFL draft, so that is a plus for him that he maybe hasn't reached his peak yet, and that NFL teams can develop him and continue to get the most out of him. But he's a great receiving target as well with his catch radius. He's very sure-handed as well. I don't think he's as good after the catch. I don't think he has the ability to break tackles. I think he was one of the lower rates in the country for tight ends this past year in terms of breaking tackles. And then his speed isn't fantastic either. So how effective is he going to be after the catch in terms of picking up first downs and actually making some impressive plays after the catch? I think that is something to kind of worry about with him. The one thing that was underrated for Loveland was his blocking. I remember a lot of people were saying Loveland is just going to be like a Dalton Kincaid. He cannot block. He's going to have to be a guy that's just like a big slot in an offense. That's not true. Loveland actually was a pretty decent blocker for Michigan this past year. And if he is further developed and he does kind of work into his frame a little bit more, he might end up being an even better blocker than Tyler Warren, for example. He really does have that capability. So if anybody says Loveland is tight end 1 over Warren, I wouldn't blame them. I do think it's close, but I think with the yards after the catch ability and kind of the versatility that Warren does have in his game, I would still prefer him over what Loveland can do at this point. But again, outside of those top 2 elite prospects, we have a lot of really nice depth in day 2 and day 3 with this tight end class. It's another very good one. Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, Mason Taylor, Terrence Ferguson, Gunnar Helm, Harold Fannin Jr., all of those guys are going to go probably in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. And I think they each kind of bring their own unique skill set. I think my favorite from that group is probably going to be Mason Taylor. I'm somebody that loves pedigree, and Jason Taylor is his dad, a Hall of Fame defensive end. So I would bet on Mason being a really good player. At LSU, he kind of did it all. He can block, and he also is a fantastic receiver. And we talked about yards after the catch and being able to be sure-handed and make things happen, making defenders miss. Mason Taylor has that in his game. I think he probably has a chance to be a top 50 pick in this draft. Elijah Arroyo out of Miami is a guy that really helped out his stock during like the Senior Bowl and some of those off-season, I would say, workouts and programs. I wouldn't say he's more of like your big slot. He's not going to be great inline blocking, but in terms of a big target and somebody that has a lot of really good speed for the tight end position, Arroyo is your guy. But really, to wrap it up with this tight end class, if your team needs a starting tight end or just some depth, maybe even just a tight end too and someone to develop, this is a great class to acquire that player. Now, the offensive line, I kind of want to do it as one big group, so tackles, guards, and centers. And this is an interesting offensive line draft. I would not say it's a great one. I mean, obviously, you have a couple of really good prospects like Armand Membu and Will Campbell, but even some of the top offensive linemen, you have a lot of questions on what they can do at the next level. And when that's the case, it does kind of lessen, I would say, the overall value of the draft class. I think Will Campbell is kind of at the forefront of that. I think he's the best pure offensive lineman in this draft. The problem with him is his arm length. He's under the average for offensive tackles. And then the question becomes, are teams not going to want to put him at tackle because of that arm length? Are they going to make him make the switch to guard or maybe even center? And then you got somebody like Josh Simmons of Ohio State. He had fantastic tape this past year for Ohio State, like the first half of the season, but then he suffered a knee injury. We did not see him against some of the better competition in the college football playoffs. But his tape early in that year was like, if he played like that the entire year, he would have been a top 5 pick, no doubt about it. I mean, he was playing elite football, but now with his injury and not being able to play a full season, does that make Simmons maybe a bottom half first round pick now? Will a team get a steal with him later in the draft? Or is he going to be somebody that still goes early just because of kind of how watered down this draft class is in terms of offensive tackles? And I think another guy like Kelvin Banks Jr., a guy that has questions with his arm length, is he going to be better suited to play guard? How early does a player with those questions go in the draft? He was once seen as maybe a first round pick. I think Banks is more in the 20 range now. I don't think he's as good as just a pure offensive lineman as Will Campbell. And if there are questions about what he can do in terms of his versatility, I just can't see how Banks is a very early first round pick. But I will say, like most drafts, there are some developmental tackles you can get later in day 2 and day 3. Josh Connerly kind of leads that clubhouse. You got Ariante Ursery from Minnesota. You got players like Charles Grant, Cameron Williams, Emory Jones Jr. Some of those guys have played for bigger programs that are still fairly young and raw, need some development, but could be worth taking a flyer on in day 2 if you are a tackle-needy team. Now, quickly over to guard. I don't think this is a great guard class. I think Tyler Booker is kind of the one surefire. This guy's going to be a great player at the next level when it comes to this position. Booker has gotten some first-round hype. I think whatever team he does go to, he will be a plug-and-play starter. Just a very physical player. He doesn't have the greatest athleticism, so if you are kind of like in the zone running scheme, like the 49ers or the Dolphins, I don't know if he fits well there because he can't really get out on the move a ton because he's just such a big human. But you're not going to move him. He's going to be an anchor in the pass game. And if you just need him to plow through somebody like on short yardage situations, Tyler Booker is your guy. But I would say outside of him, there are a couple of guys that could go in day 2, like Donovan Jackson, Tate Ratledge out of Georgia. I think Miles Frazier from LSU has been getting a lot of hype, kind of skyrocketing up draft boards as well. But as I mentioned with the tackle class and a lot of those guys, maybe even being converted to guard at the next level, I do think that could prevent teams from taking these guards earlier if they just take some of those tackles and then maybe they just convert them to guard anyway. So I think that kind of does push some of these guards further down the board. Now, the center class is definitely not good. I know a couple of years we've had like a first round pick at center, like Tyler Linderbaum, for example, for the Ravens. We don't have that in this class. We're not going to see a first round center, maybe not even a second round center. I think Jared Wilson or South McLaughlin maybe sneak in in the 3rd round, but this is definitely not a good center class. I think teams may be better suited to take somebody that does have center experience that is labeled as a guard for, I guess, the prospect list. But now to the defensive tackle and edge position for this draft, I want to do that as a whole as well. A ton of depth, especially with the defensive tackle position. I do think we're going to see probably 3 or 4 go in the 1st round. Mason Graham, probably a top 5 pick. Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon. Those are a few other defensive tackles that could sneak into the 1st round. Mason Graham is a polarizing player because he was seen as a blue chip player. But there have been questions, how high is his ceiling? Because he's not a great athlete. He's a little bit undersized actually as well for the defensive tackle position. But with his production and tape at Michigan, it's kind of hard to refute him as like a really good player. But projecting him to the NFL with his size, speed, height, all that profiling, it is tough to really see him as like an elite defensive tackle who rattles off all pros and Pro Bowls. So do you want to take that inside the top 5 or top 10 when you could get some higher upside guys with maybe a lower floor later in the 1st round? That's a debate, and I think a lot of teams will be considering that. But Walter Nolan, for example, is a guy that's a great pass rusher. He's a little bit undersized for the position, but he's very quick. He's got very good arm movement as well to just swim move and get past offensive linemen. So I think Walter Nolan's a guy that if you want some juice for the interior pass rush, he's a guy that you can look for in the 1st round. I think Kenneth Grant out of Michigan has a very high upside because of his size and his athletic profile. But I think right away he's going to be more of a run stopper, and he's going to have to be developed in terms of getting after the passer. But if he does, if he goes to the right team and he gets developed, he could end up better than Mason Graham and maybe the best overall defensive tackle from this draft. Now, Derek Harmon, a guy with a fantastic size profile. I think a team like maybe the Buffalo Bills, who do need some help in the interior of their defensive line to kind of just stop other teams in the AFC, like Derrick Henry, running the football right up the middle. He's definitely somebody to look at over 6'5" and 313 pounds. But even outside of some of those guys that could go in the 1st round, you've got a ton of nice depth in day 2 and day 3. Alfred Collins out of Texas. You've got Shamar Turner from Texas A&M. Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. Deon Walker out of Kentucky. CJ West, one of my favorite players from Indiana that could go maybe in the 4th or 5th round. All these guys had really good seasons last year at their program, and a ton of NFL teams are going to be taking flyers on a lot of these players later in the draft, and they can find some really good hidden gems. I'm telling you, this is a great defensive tackle class and very, very deep. Now over to the edge class. I'm not a super big fan of this one. I think there's one elite prospect in Abdul Carter out of Penn State. I think in most drafts, he would be a top 10 selection, seen as an elite prospect. I really like him. He does, though, have some questions with his injuries. He had a foot injury, he had a shoulder injury in the college football playoffs. I don't think that's going to drop his stock at all, but I do think it's telling that the top edge player in this class, he still has some questions. You then go to the 2 Georgia players in Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams. Walker's a really interesting player because he's seen as almost like a tweener. He's 6'1", 243 pounds. He didn't have a full-time position at Georgia. He was off-ball linebacker, and then he was edge rusher. Which one is an NFL team going to play him at? Does he have the size to be a full-time edge player where he can play against the run? And then does he have the instincts and sideline-to-sideline speed to play inside linebacker? It's just a very hard projection at the next level. But what he did at Georgia was just get after the quarterback and sack the quarterback. He's got excellent athleticism, arm length as well. But where do you take a player like Walker where you don't really know his true position, you have some questions about his size? It's a very hard evaluation. And then his teammate Mykel Williams, his size profile is ridiculous. Over 6'5", 260 pounds. He can play interior defensive lineman. He can play on the edge. He just didn't have great production at Georgia, so that always does scare kind of scouts and teams off if that can translate or not to the NFL level. If you can maximize him as like a top 10 pick, he's going to have to be able to get some sacks in the NFL. But I think Williams is a good prospect. I would take him in the top 10 just because of his flexibility to play on the interior or on the edge. I'm a little bit lower on Jalen Walker because, as I said, he's kind of like a tweener. Where are you going to play him and what's going to be his skill set in the NFL against some bigger and more physical tackles? And then after that, you get into another group of players that have really good traits about them, but again, a lot of question marks. James Pierce Jr., he's electric off the edge, great speed, he's got great bend, but his frame is really, really slim. How is he going to be against the run? Can he be a full-time player in the NFL down-to-down basis? And there's also been some chatter about maybe some character concerns. So does that make James Pierce fall out of the 1st round or to a later 1st round pick? I remember early last season, like the beginning of the year, he was seen as maybe a top 10 pick, maybe the first overall selection. But with him not really taking another step in his development this past year for Tennessee, I think that hype died a little bit. And then some of these other players like Abdul Carter really emerging that did take his stock down a little bit. But Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, another guy that was an absolute freak at the NFL Combine with his size, his 40 time, his vertical. It was all really, really impressive. The thing with Shamar Stewart, though, is he had 4.5 sacks in 3 seasons for the Aggies. 4.5 sacks. And so again, are you going to take a guy based off of his traits and his size when he didn't have a ton of production at the college level? It's always kind of a fine line what NFL teams want to do what. Does an NFL team feel confident that they can mold Stewart into being a really good pass rusher with his physical talent? Or does he simply just not have the capabilities to develop into a really nice pass rusher that has an arsenal of pass rush moves and things of that nature? That's a really interesting debate to have. And then somebody similar to James Pierce Jr. is Mike Green. Again, he's a little bit undersized and he played against the run in the NFL, but he led the country in sacks this past year with 17. He's got great speed off the edge. He's got great bend as well. He's got a great motor, but him and James Pierce Jr. are almost seen as like clones of each other because Mike Green also some off the field concerns and questions. Does that make his stock drop? His size and his frame, can he play in every scheme? Does that limit him to being like a situational pass rusher? Where do you select that type of player in the draft? So there are a lot of really interesting players that do have high upsides because of their physical traits, but whether it's because of their lack of production in college, maybe off the field concerns, or maybe even just their frame and size, there aren't many like can't miss. This guy's going to be a guaranteed great pass rusher in this edge class. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on the inside linebacker class, but I think Jahad Campbell is one of the can't miss prospects in this draft. I think he's going to be an excellent player. He's over 6'3", 235 pounds, and he ran a 4.52 40-yard dash. He is a freak. He's got the size and physicality, sideline to sideline speed, and as well the production at Alabama playing in the SEC. He did have a surgery to repair his torn labrum after the NFL Combine, so maybe that does drop him out of the first round. But if you are going to take a linebacker in this draft very early, it's Jahad Campbell, and I don't really think there's a close second behind him. I think once you get to round 3, 4, 5, we could see some of these guys off the board like Barrett Carter from Clemson, Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. I think Carson Schwessinger from UCLA, good size profile, 6'3", 242 pounds. I don't think he has the speed and sideline to sideline speed like Jahad Campbell does. So I think there could be some decent starters that you find in the middle rounds of the draft, but in terms of top prospects, it's Jahad Campbell, and that's pretty much it, I would say, for the linebacking position. Now, the cornerbacks, I think, are a really underrated position group in this draft. Obviously, you have the unicorn of Travis Hunter. I think his best position in the NFL is to be a full-time cornerback and then play like 10 to 15 snaps at receiver. I just think being a cornerback is a little bit more valuable because we see so many receivers come out every year that can emerge as day one starters, maybe like even in the 4th or 5th round. It's really hard to find an elite cornerback. So I think Travis Hunter, he should stick at cornerback and then play a few snaps a game at receiver. But even outside of Hunter, I like a lot of these players in this draft. Jahdae Barron out of Texas, a guy that has really helped his stock, I think, especially during the college football playoffs. He is known for his versatility. He can play in the slot. He can play on the boundary. He can even play safety. But again, going back to positional value and even what we said about Jalen Walker, where are you going to play him in the NFL? He's a little bit undersized at 5'11", 194 pounds, and his arm length isn't great. So in press coverage, playing that tight man-to-man coverage, he could potentially struggle against some bigger receivers. But if you are a team looking for somebody that can be a versatile chess piece in the back end of your defense, almost like Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions, Jahdae Barron is your guy. He can play all over the field. He's got excellent leadership quality as well. I think Barron is going to be a first-round pick, probably go inside the top 15 because of that versatility. But somebody that has been falling in this draft, and I don't really understand why, is Will Johnson out of Michigan. One of my blue chip players in this draft, over 6'2", 194 pounds out of Michigan. And again, another guy that was seen prior to the start of the season as a top 5 lock to go in this draft. And now he's seen as maybe a middle first-round pick. I think it mainly has to do with his injuries. He had turf toe, he had a hamstring injury that forced him to miss his pro day this offseason. So his injuries have become a little bit concerning. But when he's on the field, he's a ball hawk. And we know how important it is to NFL teams to have somebody that can just take the ball away from opposing teams. And what Will Johnson does is force turnovers. And if you throw the ball anywhere near him, it's going to be an interception. So I think Will Johnson is a player that still should go easily in the top 10 in the NFL draft. The only really other concern with him is his long speed. Does he have the capability to stay with some of the faster receivers in the NFL? So his injuries, his speed. Those are the two big questions regarding him. But in terms of his technique, his ability to pick off quarterbacks and play zone and man defense with his size, I think Will Johnson has it all. And in most drafts, would be seen as cornerback one if there wasn't a unique unicorn like Travis Hunter in it. So I think those three cornerbacks are guaranteed to go in the first round. But then you have another group of cornerbacks that I still think could sneak in at maybe the 25 to 32 range and then be very early picks in day two. Maxwell Harrison from Kentucky, Azariah Thomas from Florida State, Trey Amos from Ole Miss, Benjamin Morrison, and Siobhan Revel Jr. from ECU. All those guys, depending on how teams view them, could go in the bottom half of the first round or early on day two. I think overall, we have elite prospects in this cornerback class, and we also have a lot of really good depth. I think Siobhan Revel Jr. from ECU is one of my favorite sleepers because he has just great size and length to him. He's over 6'2", 194 pounds, very long arms. He used that length a ton in press and man coverage at ECU. Thing with him is he tore his ACL in September. So that is a red flag for teams if you don't want to take a player off a major injury. But if he didn't suffer that ACL, I think Revel would be seen as a lock first round pick. I really like his upside as just a true shutdown cornerback. And if you do want to take a swing on somebody that has a very high upside, I think Revel is the guy that fits that perfectly. I think Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, another guy that didn't play a ton last year because he also suffered an injury. But he's another guy, versatility, playing in the slot, playing out wide. I think Morrison's another guy that could go a lot earlier than people are imagining. But overall, a really good cornerback class. I love some of the top guys. I think there's a lot of good depth all the way through. I mean, even somebody like Kobe Bryant from Kansas, he's had a couple of good years of film in college now. You could probably get him in the 4th or 5th round. But finally, the safety class, and I would say this is a pretty good one. I think you can feel confident about 6 or 7 of these guys being day one starters for you in the NFL. I think the top two, though, are Nick Amanawari from South Carolina and Malachi Starks from Georgia. I was a huge fan of Starks at the beginning of kind of this draft process. He wasn't as good for Georgia this past year. I think that does have to do kind of with what his role was and him having to pick up a lot of slack for other players on that defense. But if you watch his film in 2023, he was one of the best players in the country, really made a ton of plays every single game for the Bulldogs, and I still think that's in there for him somewhere. So I would definitely take him in the first round. I think a team maybe like the Minnesota Vikings would be a good fit for him in Brian Flores' defense, allowing him to play in the box and get after quarterbacks and just kind of just make plays. I think Starks could have a really good season even as a rookie. But then Nick Amanawari is another example of a guy that's just a freak athlete, but he doesn't have really the best film when it comes to his college career. He's 6'3", 220 pounds. He ran a sub 4.4 40 at the NFL draft. He had a huge vertical leap as well. But again, for South Carolina, his film just wasn't great. So another case of, do you want to take the upside with the physical traits of Amanawari, or would you rather go with a guy that has proven more with his film in the SEC with Malachi Starks? That's kind of the debate between those two top guys. I personally would still lean Starks. I just value his film a bit more. And I still think he is a good athlete. He's over 6'1", 200 pounds. It's not like he's undersized. So that is a big debate with the top safeties right now. But I do think Starks and Amanawari likely do both go in the first round, or maybe one of them slips in very early in day two. But I do think they're both going to be top 50 picks, no doubt about it. But then the rest of the class with like Xavier Watts, Kevin Winston Jr., and Jalen Reed from Penn State, Andrew Makuba from Texas, Malachi Moore from Alabama, Dante Trader from Maryland. You can find some really good options in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round where one of these guys can step in and maybe even start for you from day one. So I would say this is a good safety class and kind of just a good secondary class in general. If you need a starter at cornerback, you need some more safety depth, this is definitely the class to do it. If you need a defensive tackle and some good value for that position in day 2 and day 3, another really good draft to do that. But if you want an edge rusher, if you want a center, if you want an inside linebacker, this is probably not the best draft for you to find those needs. If you need a running back or tight end, definitely the class to take one. If you need a receiver, I would say in day 2 or day 3 is kind of the sweet spot for that. If you need a quarterback, yeah, this is going to be a very tough class to get one of those. But if you just need some depth or somebody to be a backup for the next 10 years, definitely still some good options later in this class. But that is my general draft guide for the 2025 NFL draft. If you want to see a little bit deeper of a dive into some of these prospects and positions, I've posted a few videos on my channel and I try to do a mock draft about every week. So be on the lookout for a couple more of those as we get to the home stretch before the NFL draft actually takes place. But if you guys want to see another video similar to this, going over my best fits and best bets for this draft? Let me know in the comments section below, and I will definitely make that before the draft in a couple of weeks. But subscribe to the channel if you are new. Drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next one.